Throughout the 20th century, countless great meals faded away. I'm here to remind you that these dishes aren't meant to be forgotten, at least not yet, because the culinary world could use a bold revival. Do you think you're a city person? Do the bustling streets of New York, the scent of fresh coffee, and the crumple of newspapers on a busy intersection make sense to you? If so, you might love some Jellied Consomme if you haven't tried some already. It wasn't just New York, but even in Chicago and Boston, you could find this dish in the banquet halls and menus of fancy French restaurants, five-star hotels, and any other block of cement that screamed luxury. A lot of the upper class had a penchant for high-class European-style dining. They'd showcase dishes that were a part of European culture like consomme. But that doesn't mean only the wealthy had their fair share of Jellied Consomme. Middle-class home cooks tried gelatin packets instead of imported meat aspics to mimic it. It caught the eye of more than a few kinds of people, and it also became a bit of a status symbol. You know the way someone's rich if they're eating beluga caviar or something? It's like that. Despite the ambience around it, America tried a lot of different things with aspics, jellies, and gelatins, and Jellied Consomme became a thing of the past. It even got removed from the Waldorf Astoria Hotel's menu in New York, despite being a mainstay for a long while. I guess time waits for nobody, right? You could really make an argument that a large chunk of American cuisine and culinary preferences come from us being influenced by European-style cooking. I mean, you wouldn't be the first one to make a case, but you definitely have a lot of material. If you look at places like New England, where steamed sweat pudding was the talk of the town, it's hard not to draw a connection between the dots. The times we're living in right now are probably the least influenced by our neighbors in the United Kingdom. Steamed sweet puddings weren't really a meal made for those living in the lap of luxury. Though don't be mistaken, plenty of high-end restaurants in Boston and New York would put out their best take on one when it was holiday season. Something about it going well with plum pudding, but then again, what doesn't go with plums around Christmas? Anyway, there's some irony here. It's in the fact that suet pudding actually became something popular during the Depression because it could be made with cheap fats and lard instead of needing butter. From tavern food to a pricey menu, that's a big jump for a humble recipe to make. But I've seen stranger things happen in Boston. These are some pretty mild flavors. They're sweet, unorthodox, not the kind of thing that would attract a big crowd. Tamale pies, on the other hand, are exactly what you put out when you know there's a crowd of 12 that's aching for a bite. In places like California and Texas, the need for a savory fixing has always been a massive part of people's food choices. Go anywhere in Phoenix, Los Angeles, or San Antonio, and you'll find tamale pie joints a dime a dozen. You'll count at least a dozen recipes just in cookbooks alone if you're the type to read those. It took a while for this to become as ingrained into the culture there as it did. Tamale pies didn't get their reputation without a lot of help from the locals, but they only ever got that help because there was a lot of potential in the recipe. From school lunch programs, office dinners, cookbooks, Mexican-American restaurants on the corner of residential areas and busy streets, everyone had their own take on an exotic but easy pie that no one wanted to miss out on. Authentic Mexican cuisine was powerful. It was loaded with flavor, it was captivating, and it was something that people hadn't had a taste of before, not like this. Tamale pies became a gateway food for many people looking to explore a spicier side of America's food options. On the other hand, savoriness is an entire spectrum. On that broad, ever-expanding horizon, you got all kinds of stuff. Some Mediterranean, some Scandinavian, others just pure American genius. This time, we're going to look at French cooking, specifically oyster patties, and how they used to be what kept each and every person living by the ocean going. Now, if you had the pleasure of growing up in St. Louis or Cincinnati in the 1900s, or even New Orleans, you might remember places that really did it good when it came to French cuisine. I'm talking about heavy hitters like Antoine's and Galatoire's. Oyster patties were considered some of the best stuff you could get at places like these, and typically speaking, it was always reserved for special occasions. I'm talking about wedding menus, New Year's parties, and luxury hotel appetizers. The kind of places where fat cats go to sun themselves, you know? It didn't stop there, though. Oysters weren't always the kind of thing a rich person would play with. or even somebody with a nice cushy office in a high-rise building. It used to be the go-to option for fishermen, laborers, factory workers, home chefs, and everyone in between. You could get it for cheap at roadside diners, supper clubs, and anywhere that was deep into new American cuisine. This is kind of why we have the adage of not flowing too close to the sun, though. Eventually, oyster prices started to skyrocket because of the interest and how it was leading to massive overfishing. Pollution also meant that you weren't really getting good, live oysters anymore. People started to avoid them, and on top of that, shrimp and crab were easier to catch. From there on, it just wasn't looking good for oyster patties in the long run. You'd think the last place you would find an innovative casserole would be a church cookbook, but a lot of nuns made a mean Spanish rice casserole for their lunch programs and food drives. It wasn't an authentic dish, despite the name. It was actually just an imitation of a Mexican dish known as arroz rojo. That didn't stop every Tex-Mex diner and restaurant from abusing the Hispanic angle, though, because if you market it as an exotic food, it'll draw gullible suburban moms looking to spend more than a reasonable amount. So what could you expect from a rice casserole, really? Well, if you trace it back historically, rice-based dishes were first popularized by Spanish casseroles. But it was dishes like arroz con pollo and paella that inspired the idea of a rice filling for a casserole. Now, American cooking was different from Spanish cooking. It typically always relied a bit much on butter and olive oil. Spanish cooking, on the other hand, made big use of seafood, bits of protein, herbs, and spices. Techniques like braising and tomato sauces were all things you would associate with it, and all of this came together in a Spanish rice casserole, which was a wonderfully spicy and delectable casserole. It was like a rice bowl wrapped in cheese, really. So with veal birds, these were actually the most common in New York and Pennsylvania. Think popular Midwest areas like Ohio, Illinois, or New England hotspots like Boston. You'd call this Yankee-style home cooking, and it was actually a mix of several different influences. You had influences from both Italian involtini and German rouladen, but hotel rooms and hybrid restaurants tried to Americanize the dish for the palates of the masses. It eventually did become a dish that was okay for home cooks to rely on regularly, especially around the 1920s and 1950s. It was only later on throughout the 20th century that there was a pretty sharp drop in veal consumption. I mean, appreciation for all things retro and nostalgic indulgence aside, this dish is pretty rustic. It was a part of a time where meat was the only thing on people's minds, and whether the bird of choice was chicken, turkey, duck, or a whole other animal, people were going absolutely crazy with how much meat they were consuming. It got to a point where concerns over animal welfare and continuous poaching became a serious matter for the government. Besides that, the whole process was a headache. Stuffing, rolling, and tying little bits of veal took quite a lot of effort, and a quarter pounder was always quicker and in most cases cheaper too. I don't get why we took so much European influence. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that things like meat roly-polies would be popular here, as ridiculous as that name sounds. Hey, if they got one thing right, it was the idea of making meat puddings. Now, I still don't get why they're better than your regular chocolate pudding, but different strokes for different folks. Despite the cheery associations people usually have with pudding, this used to be a boarding house classic, so it's not exactly the sunniest of circumstances. On a practical note, jokes aside, these meat puddings were a lifesaver. It was a bit after suet-based cooking became more popular, and the age of vegetable shortening and butter-based cooking hadn't begun yet. Working-class pubs, bars, diners, and taverns often had a decent meat pudding up for grabs if you were willing to lower your hygiene standards a bit. Meat roly-oly was one of the most common ways of doing that. It wasn't as heavy as a meatloaf, and it wasn't as complicated as a casserole, but it was just right. Towards the end of the 20th century, though, people got pretty tired of the British way of doing things. They considered suet puddings to be really lackluster and out of style, and abandoned it in favor of fast food and more Asian influences. Stuffed hearts are almost exactly what they sound like. They're literally animal hearts that have been stuffed with a variety of vegetables, sauces, spices, and whatnot. It's awful meat, you know? It was a whole thing. At least it used to be. And that wasn't just a regional thing either. You could go from Louisiana all the way to Vermont, and you'd probably find at least a few people who have had a story with stuffed hearts as the main player. Americans would eventually move away from this kind of cuisine, especially thanks to economic difficulties settling and convenience food becoming more and more of a thing. Why go for offal when you can have frozen Hot Pockets and Totino pizza rolls, right? Besides that, the association with it being peasant food was something that moved people away from dishes like these. It's funny how quick people turn on what kept their families full during times like the Depression, but the flow of trends is cruel. Stuffed hearts started dwindling more and more until the only places that served them were heritage cooking communities and German delis. Now I swear, this really is a food video. It's just that people had a lot more broader minds than we did back in the day. If you went to Utah, live in Idaho, or ever trekked through the Mountain West in the 20th century, a name you'd be incredibly familiar with would be frog eye salad. This dish actually made its way to several community and church cookbooks alike, but before you start jumping out of your seat and closing the channel, there were no eyes nor frogs involved in this dish. It was just the people's attempt at trying to get their kids to eat a salad for once in their life. The idea was that if the teenagers weren't eating fruit salads on their own, maybe throwing some mayonnaise into the mix would help smoothen things along. They couldn't have been more wrong, though, and the dish honestly ended up just being something only adults and middle-aged couples would eat to avoid letting things spoil. Gotta repurpose those leftovers somehow, right? Despite it not being popular with the intended crowd, the salad did definitely get popular, or at least enough to be called a niche interest. It had a limited presence in places like the Midwest, but it still did well enough in potlucks and the like. Anatoma bread was something exclusive to Massachusetts and Maine, where you could arguably call them the central hubs for the thing itself. It became extremely common in any Massachusetts bakery during the early 1900s, and it was a brunch side for many decades. A traditional and rustic bread that reminded people of Yankee cooking and cornmeal bread, it became something that couldn't keep up with the public favor it had earned for itself. By the middle of the 20th century, the industrialization train had shown no signs of stopping. We got to mass-producing white bread and having pre-sliced loaves of sandwiches, or just outright frozen sandwiches. In the face of that, it didn't make a lot of sense to buy a specific kind of bread, spend time experimenting with it, and getting to know it. Anadama bread wasn't ever mass-produced. It was more of a specialty item available in Massachusetts and New England bakeries. Today, you can still find some places that do one and sell it, but it'll be a pretty niche find. Short of making it on your own now, people genuinely don't remember a time where this was ever popular anymore. Boston brown bread, or otherwise known as Boston town bread, is something that went viral in upstate New York and other parts of the Midwest like Ohio and Illinois. This is right out of New England cuisine, and the most common partner in crime you could expect to see with Boston town bread was a side of baked beans. You could also just use it as a filler food and dip it in stews, soups, or have it with curries, but this is a pretty old-fashioned bread. It's admirable how it managed to keep up with the times, but unfortunately, the times never made life any easier for a bread like this. You see, steaming bread was a little too intensive. It was a hard process, and it was a time-consuming one more than anything else. Towards the massive boost in the production of white bread that I talked about earlier, people began to realize something. They really want their bread fast. More than anything, nobody had the attention span to wait more than the time it took to toast a single slice of bread. That meant that breads and loaves that actually required delicate work and baking skill went right out of the window, and with pay cuts breathing down on our neck for every second we go missing on company time. That's something I can understand. At least the corporate world will always be the same, even if the culinary world keeps forgetting classics. We're going to stay around in New England and Rhode Island for a bit. Maybe dip our toes into Delaware and North Carolina. I mean, where else would you go to discuss how popular Johnny cakes were? Crispy exteriors, a dense, gooey, buttery interior, and a sweet and nutty flavor that had notes of corn. This dish was something that people fell in love with at first sight, and there were more than a few reasons for that. People started to prefer corn over wheat, particularly in their breads. especially since it became hard to grow wheat in the rough terrain that surrounded most New England soil. On the other hand, since arguably its inception, corn has always thrived in massive numbers in America. It's one of our most portable and shelf-stable foods, a proper trooper. Wherever you go, you can expect corn to work for you. Plus, in places like Rhode Island, which end up being trade hubs for traveling merchants and the like, molasses were a big source. Lots of merchants would rely on trading sugar and molasses with the Caribbean. All of this meant that there was a lot of practical reason to favor Johnny Cakes, but historically, it's been around for longer than the trade business, and the concept of shelf stability has been around. They've been a wonderful travel food in regions like the Appalachia and Chesapeake, but they've been popular thanks to Native American tribes such as the Powhatan and Narragansett tribes. These were the first ones who ever taught European settlers just how to work with corn, and I think they did a national service sharing their secrets. Corn dodgers are something that I've always been popular throughout the United States of America. The southern and midwestern areas, especially Kentucky, Arkansas, Missouri, and Tennessee, were corn dodger central. Like I was talking about previously, corn has always been something that America has relied on. Much like the way Johnny Cakes had a grip on the area, dodgers were popular where corn was a natural resource that was almost a bit too abundant. Frontier homesteads, rural outskirts, small towns and cities, and even military use. Corn dodgers were favored by all kinds of people in all kinds of circumstances. Dodgers were something that were made with cornmeal, salt, and water, and they had just a little bit of bacon grease to lend them that extra oomph of flavor. That crunchy crust, a texture on the inside that felt all too similar to a sausage with all the comfort of a corn, and the oh-so-subtle smokiness with each bite. It was enough to turn even the staunchest of haters into certified lovers of corn dodgers, and today they're a big part of American culture. You never see a dad bring a questionable amounts of these to a baseball game? Potato rolls might sound like this wrap filled with hash browns, but they're actually this super soft, comforting sweet bread roll that's made entirely with potato flour mixed into the dough, or in some areas, just mashed potatoes. If you could turn a pillow into an edible meal, this is probably what that would be like. Potato rolls stay fresh for longer. They have that beautiful sun-kissed look to them thanks to that golden, perfectly glowy and glossy crust, and the flavor here is to die for. Some meals are just built well. You could have absolutely zero talent for cooking and no experience, but it would seem like your hands have been blessed by God Himself. In truth, the recipe was just that good, and that's exactly what we have here with potato rolls. If you ever went to a festival in Pennsylvania or Maryland, you would know that potato rolls were a big hit at any kind of event like that. Potatoes were also used as a way of extending wheat, since flour was expensive. You might be wondering that if it was so good, what is a dish like this doing in the middle of a list of forgotten foods? Well, unfortunately, it all had to do with the commercialization of bread. In today's America, we have every kind of bread you can name, think, Google, and ask your friends about under a section tucked away neatly in an aisle reserved specifically for bread. This is just how every grocery store works now. In the face of that, potato rolls, which were starting to become more and more tied to rural tradition, were seen as an old-style rustic meal and just couldn't keep up, which is a crime. Have you ever had a craving for something sweet but earthy, soft but crunchy, nutty but also warm and slightly tangy? I got the perfect thing for you. Graham bread is this dense bread that has a flour named after it too, and it's one that you need in specific if you're going to be attempting to make this dish in the comfort of your humble abode. Graham flour was something that Sylvester Graham, a Presbyterian minister from the 1830s, first discovered the potential of. It's actually a little funny, but the entire reason he even wanted to work with Graham flour was because he thought white flour was literally just evil. Yes, I'm not kidding, he had actual beef with flour. It being unhealthy is one thing, but the guy thought it was actually immoral and evil. That's just a joke that writes itself. I'm glad he has such a productive sense of humor though, because Graham's ideas started to spread throughout Boston before eventually reaching the heart of America, New York City. From there on, it was just a few short steps to taking over the entire nation, and that's exactly what happened. Graham bread became something that contended with the top tiers in the bread world, even if it couldn't last the long haul. lacy cornbread may as well be the meal of the South. Again, we're dealing with another magical hit from cornmeal, the gift horse that just seems to never stop giving. This time, the trifecta that gives all the magic is just cornmeal, water, and salt. Yup, that really is all you need here. You throw that into a hot skillet that's been lined ever so gently with bacon grease or oil, whichever is your pick, and then, unlike the usual circus you go through cooking cornbread, this time, you get a delicate cornbread with a lace-like exterior. No, that doesn't mean it's wrapped in silk, but the exterior is extremely delicate. It falls apart at a simple, heavy touch or the first instance of pressure as your teeth begin to sink into the surface. It's a really addictive feeling, and it's a big part of why rural farming communities in places like Mississippi and South Carolina would thrive on lacy cornbread. The idea for it actually comes from making West African cooking traditions, though, and grain-based batters used to be a big part of their food and how they kept their daily nutrition in check. The idea with them was to fry it, making this super thin cornbread. You would get this cornbread that was so light and airy it was almost inconceivable that it's practically the same bread you've been eating all your life. Today, in the South, many Black families try their best to keep this precious tradition alive, and I gotta say, it's definitely worth trying out. Now, you might be starting to get an idea of how many different kinds of bread we've had throughout our history. Milk toast was one of them too, and it was exactly what it sounds like. I don't really need to explain this one because I think we've all just seen our grandpas and dads eat nothing but this for like 50 days on end, and then you get to the parts here it became hospital food for the longest time in the early 1900s thanks to how easy it was to digest. Milk toast became something that thrived in the Depression era because it was basically just the cheapest combination you could find. All other kinds of breakfast meals, bacon, sausage, ham, eggs, hash browns, all of that was either unavailable or something people were desperately trying to reserve for even more rainier days. Milk toast, on the other hand, was something that became a beautiful way of showing that even if all Americans have is milk and some bread, they'll make something out of it. This revolving door of breads we have going on around at the last bit of the video, yeah, this isn't ending just yet. Next up, we have Bannock. Sounds tropical? It's anything but. Dense, round, and thoroughly versatile, this flatbread can be baked, fried, put on a griddle, and cooked, or even steamed, and it all depends on how you like to wake up on Monday and what you enjoy your tea with. Almost the perfect breakfast food, Bannock has traditionally always been made using oat flour, baking powder, or just a little bit of fat. When you order some of this, you can expect a crispy exterior, a crumbly interior, and a nutty bread that goes great with any jam you can name. If there's one thing Scotland did right, it was giving us this, and I honestly can't thank enough for it every time I remember I can just wake up and devise a bannock today. There are very few breads that bring the best out of the spreads they're with, and bannock is one of them. It works with honey and butter too. Queen of puddings is a pretty typical British dessert that's finally not a bread for once. It's instead a custard that's been soaked in a base made out of, ding ding ding, you guessed it, breadcrumbs. Just when you thought it was over, American history catches you with a loophole. With Queen of puddings, the naming couldn't be more apt, because a bite into this makes you realize you really are dealing with a pretty regal-looking and tasting dessert here. From its humble beginnings in 19th century England to its long migration to New England and eventually Pennsylvania and New York, Queen of puddings has been a budget-friendly recipe in tight-knit British communities for more than a few decades now. The ones that still get up to having high tea often enjoy it the most, really. Despite the very royal-sounding name, this dish actually is light on your wallet, and luckily on your digestive system too, because it is not heavy at all, despite the breadcrumb base. You can actually expect the flavors to be very airy and soft too, since you get a lot of vanilla notes here. Blancmange sounds more like a very fancy aged wine or a Harry Potter spell than it does a dessert, but stranger things have come out of medieval England, and similarly, a lot more worse-tasting things have too. This molded dessert is all kinds of sweet, creamy, and just the perfect treat to pick up your spirits from whatever dumpster they've decided to crash in. The pudding-like consistency, the vanilla and almond flavorings, and the mold, oh, the mold. The designs on these things can seriously go for days. I mean, it's the kind of food where you don't know if you should look at it, do an entire photo shoot for the gram, or if you should just dig in right away. Funnily enough, it actually didn't always used to be a dessert. For the longest time, blancmange was a savory dish that had chicken and almonds in it, but it turned into a sweet pudding somewhere throughout the 19th century. In New England and upper-class mid-Atlantic homes, it was a status dish as much as it was a genuine marvel, but now, it's only forgotten. Speaking of puddings, let's not forget figgy duff. Yet another wonderful relic of British culture we can thank our very dear settler friends for from the 17th and 18th centuries. This used to be a massive thing in fishing villages, and it was something you would make when times were tough, resources were low, the mouths to feed were many, and you just weren't sure what to do. The idea here was that figgy duff was actually really big in calories, and it was long-lasting. It had shelf-stable ingredients, so it was typically easy to make for most people, and that worked out really well since most sailors and fishermen were living in remote fishing huts that were far away from trade hubs and urban cities. In terms of the taste, you can honestly expect this to hit like a truck, and I don't mean with flavor, I mean with how heavy it is. Flavor-wise, this is a lot closer to a sweet pudding than it is anything else, but it's usually something that gets served with a fairly sweet sauce and some whipped cream to counterbalance all that. Now, you might be surprised, but in those same coastal areas and British communities, figgy duff actually became something of a Christmas tradition and would be served with roast meats, though I'm not really too sure why they picked a savory pudding of all things to go with roasts. Like to catch up on some reading? Pick up any New England Heritage cookbook, and you'll find recipe after recipe for snow pudding, which, despite what the name makes you think, has very little to do with winter or winter tradition. Snow puddings were actually the opposite. They were something eBay enjoyed in summer. And they were this really delicate, lemon-flavored dessert that was made from egg whites that had been whipped to the moon and back, gelatin, sugar, and lemon juice. They were served with a custard sauce that was pretty creamy, and a deeply cloud-like texture that made them even softer and prettier than gelatin desserts. This is the kind of thing you order out on a date when you're really trying to impress her. You know what I mean? It's bright, a bit tart-flavored, but the real catch is how it melts in your mouth and you don't even realize it. It's just something that fits our love of lemon desserts, and this vintage Victorian masterpiece doesn't let down in any regard. It's just a shame we had to lose so many of those recipes and how it went out of style because of frozen lemon pies just being available everywhere. Depression cakes are exactly what they sound like. These were cakes that people came up with in the middle of the Great Depression from 1929 onwards. The name of the game was Adaptation, and Americans had gone professional by this point. Since flour, milk, and eggs were not things that were easily available, affordable, or even wise purchases given the way things were, people decided to take a note out of a mock food culture's book and try to imitate a cake, except without all the things that you know. Make a cake a cake. This Depression-era cake has no eggs, no milk, and no flour, instead using a host of different leavening agents, water, and a lot of creativity to get the job done. What you end up with is this really nice sponge cake that, believe it or not, hits pretty close to him. Close enough to satisfy those cake cravings you might be having but can't do anything about. You can do a lot more with pureed prunes than the media will have you believe. But not this media. This channel is all about opening up your mind to what you can really make in the kitchen. Prune whip is this super airy dessert that takes egg whites and makes them the fluffiest, most soufflé-like whip you've ever seen. It was something that people originally came up with due to health scares. I mean, we all know prunes are great for your stomach and all. Let's be real, despite the brief stunt the dish had in hospital menus, church cookbooks, and health magazines, everyone ate it for the fact that it was one of the best prune desserts around. On top of that, it was cheap, went great with extra amounts of whipped cream, and was an amazing alternative to otherwise more expensive and heavy cakes and pies that would probably end up being left for leftovers. Prune whips were like a cloud turned into an edible dessert, and that's honestly as dreamy as it gets. They fell out of favor simply because they weren't cool enough. I mean, at some point, the health consciousness angle stuck, and they became known as old people's food exclusively. Before chicken became everyone's favorite pie stuffing, rabbit pie was a favorite on the Easter table. Made out of tender rabbit meal, this savory pie was a household favorite in many rural areas. Rabbit meat is not only rich in flavor, but it's full of nutrients, which made this a healthy choice for many and a staple of the American pioneers. Plus, rabbit meat didn't cost a fortune like most meat back in the day and was widely available. Along with rabbit meat, ingredients of the filling of a rabbit pie typically included onions, celery, and carrots. Some English variations included prunes, bacon, and cider, while the Australians sometimes included the food paste Vegemite. Magic Pan crepe cakes come from those Magic Pan restaurants that made crepe dishes a big deal back in the 60s and 70s. Here's how they do it. They layer up thin crepes with all sorts of fillings, from sweet creams and fruits to savory cheeses and spinach. Basic crepe batter is pretty simple, just flour, eggs, milk, and butter. But when you stack them up and fill them just right, it turns into something special. Each layer was carefully assembled to ensure the flavors melded beautifully, providing a gourmet experience that was rare at the time. These crepe cakes were a hit because you could watch them being made right in front of you, which was pretty cool back then. Though they were a favorite for a while, as the Magic Pan spots closed down and eating out got more casual, crepe cakes weren't as common. When they served them, it was always with style, dressed up with a little sauce or a sprinkle of powdered sugar to make them look as good as they tasted. You can't possibly reminisce about Grandma's forgotten casseroles without bringing up the ham and potato casserole. This one combined two classic comfort foods, ham and potatoes, and instantly became a favorite on the dining table. You know all those leftover ham that goes bad in your refrigerator after the holidays? Well, this recipe was a way to spice it up and turn it into something new, and of course, Grandma did it best. There was even a healthier version of the ham and potato casserole that was made using lean ham, low-fat dairy products, and extra vegetables to boost the nutritional content. Grandma used whatever potatoes she could find at the farmer's market, but this one could be made by a variety. Some recipes called for russets, while others used Yukon Gold or red potatoes, depending on your texture preference. The malted milk drink, a sweet and nostalgic beverage, first appeared in the late 19th century. This creamy delight is made from milk, malt powder, and sometimes ice cream, blended into a refreshing treat. The drink was invented by William Horlick, who patented malted milk powder in 1887 as a nutritious supplement for infants and invalids. It was popularized by brands like Horlicks, which marketed it as a nutritious and tasty option. Unusual flavors or variations of the malted milk drink include chocolate, strawberry, and vanilla, adding to its appeal. In the early 20th century, malted milk was touted as a health tonic and was even recommended by doctors for its nutritional benefits. The drink inspired a love for creamy and sweet drinks, often enjoyed as a quick breakfast on the go. Squirrel stew might sound unusual today, but it was a popular dish in rural areas. Yep, our bushy-tailed friends were once a common ingredient in many kitchens. Also known as Brunswick stew, it was a tomato-based stew generally involving local beans, vegetables, and originally small game meat such as squirrel. However, many variations from around the world used rabbit meat too. The origin of this meaty stew is controversial at best, as the states of Virginia and Georgia both claim its birth, with Brunswick County in Virginia and the city of Brunswick in Georgia claiming it was developed there. To keep things peaceful, let's just say Virginia and Georgia both played a role in creating this delicious stew. Squirrel meat was easily hunted and provided a necessary source of protein. With the rise of chicken, squirrel stew has fallen out of flavor. But hey, this one is pretty easy to whip up and will satisfy your Thursday night meat cravings like no other. Poke cake hit the scene in the 70s and got everyone excited because you could do so much with it. After baking a simple vanilla or chocolate cake, you poke holes all over it and fill those up with Jell-O, pudding, or sweetened condensed milk. This trick lets the filling soak into the cake, making it super moist and adding layers of flavor. Jell-O pushed this idea big time, showing everyone how a plain cake could turn into a showstopper. It was a hit because you could tweak it with different fillings depending on what you were into. But as tastes got more sophisticated and folks leaned towards less sugary stuff, poke cake kind of lost its spotlight. It was usually served in a big dish, looking casual and family-friendly. You'd often see it with a fluffy layer of whipped cream on top, maybe some fruit or sprinkles too, just to make those flavors pop. So, squash might not be our top pick on a regular day, but Grandma's squash casserole was so irresistible that we found ourselves going back for seconds, or even thirds. This casserole was a staple in Southern cuisine and was Gram's favorite way of sneaking nutrients into our dinner. Squash is rich in vitamins A and C, potassium and fiber, making it a wholesome choice. Now, this dish was typically famous in the summer when squash was available in abundance, but you could freeze the veggie and enjoy it all year round too. Squash casserole was highly customizable, meaning Gram could tweak it by adding cooked bacon, sausage, or even fresh herbs. The secret ingredient that gave this bad boy its unique taste was a dash of hot sauce, so next time you attempt making this dish for a potluck, don't forget the key ingredient. Thank me later! Pancake on a stick, a fun and convenient breakfast treat, was first created in the early 21st century. This dish combines the classic flavors of pancakes and sausage into an easy-to-eat form, typically enjoyed as a quick breakfast or snack. The dish consists of a sausage link coated in pancake batter and then fried until golden. Pancake on a stick became popular when it was introduced as a convenient food option by companies like Jimmy Dean. Unusual variations, such as using different types of sausage or adding cheese, have added to the appeal of this dish. In 2017, pancake on a stick was featured on the menu of select fast food chains, further popularizing this innovative breakfast option. The dish has since become a favorite at state fairs and festivals across the United States. You won't find a lot of people talking about jellied eels now, because it has largely disappeared from the British menus. But hey, if you're ever feeling adventurous enough, I say give this one a try. Straight out of the royal family's dinner table, beef Wellington was a beef steak dish with the perfect regal twist. This delicacy was made of a tender beef fillet coated with pâté and duxelles, then wrapped in puff pastry, which made it just as fancy as it sounds. It was traditionally served with a rich red wine sauce such as a Madeira or Cabernet Sauvignon reduction. Now, the origin of this meal is shrouded in history, but it is suggested that it emerged in England in the 19th century and was named after the Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley. This steak required a lot of time and patience, which made it a meal for only the royals of England. It's a part of ancient history now, but you might be able to taste it if you make your way to Regal Balls or a Michelin star restaurant in London. Back in the late 70s, Jell-O rolled out pudding pops, turning the frozen treat game on its head with something way creamier than the usual ice pops. Made from milk, sugar, and pudding mix, these pops were all about delivering a super smooth, rich taste. At their peak, pudding pops were so popular that they spawned a range of flavors, including chocolate, vanilla, and swirls. They totally stood out, thanks in part to those catchy Bill Cosby ads shouting, "Pudding in a pop." That marketing charm made these treats a big deal in households across the board. But even with their popularity, Kraft decided to cut them from the lineup in the early 2000s. They were trying to slim down their product range. The bright, fun packaging and that quirky non-wood stick are what a lot of folks remember about them. Leftover turkey in the fridge? Consider it your lucky day, because that used to call for Grandma's legendary turkey noodle casserole. This casserole made mornings after Thanksgiving something to look forward to. This was the go-to recipe for using up leftover turkey and noodles after Thanksgiving or Christmas. All Grandma had to do was mix in the ingredients and add a topping made from breadcrumbs, crushed crackers, or even fried onions. Like most of the casseroles on this list, this was also a one-dish wonder and didn't require much labor. And you know, Gram used to be tired from making us a grand feast the night before, so this was an easy way to serve something delicious on the dining table without putting in too much effort. This was a kid-friendly meal that appealed to even the pickiest eaters. What's not to love about a creamy sauce and some noodles all drenched in cheese? Deviled eggs for breakfast is a surprising yet delightful dish that has roots in the early 20th century. It's a brunch favorite, featuring hard-boiled eggs filled with a creamy mixture of egg yolks, mayonnaise, mustard, and spices. Dijon or yellow mustard is typically used for a tangy kick, while toppings like paprika, chives, bacon bits, or caviar add variety. The dish is unique compared to other egg-based dishes because of its creamy and tangy filling, contrasting with the firm egg whites. Deviled eggs were originally known as stuffed eggs and appeared in American cookbooks as early as the 19th century, with variations featuring ingredients like vinegar, capers, and anchovies. Pressed duck, a French-inspired masterpiece, is just as complex as it sounds. The dish involves cooking a duck and then using a special press to extract the blood and juices, which are then used to create a rich, flavorful sauce. You heard that right? A sauce made out of blood and bone marrow. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, this dish was a showstopper at French restaurants back in the day, and its unique taste spoke for itself. The complex dish was a specialty of Rouen, and its creation was attributed to an innkeeper from the city of Duclair. It's also known as canard à la presse, and is a specialty of the Tour d'Argent restaurant in Paris. Cooking pressed duck isn't a job for the weak and requires special time and effort, which is exactly why it has become a rare dinner time on our tables now. And then, of course, not everyone has a knack for eating a sauce made out of bone marrow. Snowball cakes are all about that winter vibe, with their fluffy marshmallow filling and a coating of shredded coconut that looks just like snow. Inside, there's a chocolate sponge cake that keeps everything rich and interesting. These treats got their name from their cool, snowball-like appearance, making them a hit during the holiday season. They used to be all over the place as pre-packaged snacks from brands like Hostess, known for their fun and distinctive look. But as people started choosing more natural and less processed options, snowball cakes kind of faded out. They were usually wrapped up all neat, making them easy to grab and go. Cheese and potatoes are like a match made in heaven, and Grandma's cheesy, scalloped potatoes was straight out of any cheese lover's dream. So this casserole tastes even better than it looked, and let me tell you, it looked finger-licking delicious. The term scalloped comes from the French word escalope, which originally referred to thin slices of meat. However, in the case of scalloped potatoes, it refers to the thinly sliced potatoes used in the dish. Many grandmas used old-fashioned methods to make their cheesy, scalloped potatoes, including hand-slicing the potatoes thinly, layering them with love, and cooking them slowly. Some even added secret ingredients they swear by, like a dash of nutmeg, a hint of garlic, or even a sprinkle of paprika for added flavor. The best part about this one was its crispy crust, and I'm sure you remember fighting all your siblings for the bigger chunk of it. This dish wasn't only tasty, but was also practical. It was a one-pot wonder, meaning it could be cooked and served in the same dish, making cleanup a breeze. I'm sure Grandma loved that. Hamburger hash, a hearty and comforting dish, became popular in the mid-20th century. It's a breakfast favorite made with ground beef, potatoes, and onions sautéed together. Ground chuck is often used for a flavorful base. Hamburger hash is garnished with fresh herbs or served with eggs, adding to its satisfying taste. The dish became popular for its convenience and hearty appeal, especially for families or large groups. Regional variations exist, such as incorporating bell peppers or different meats. In some regions, corned beef hash is a popular variation, using corned beef instead of ground beef. The dish was commonly paired with coffee or juice for breakfast, reflecting America's love for hearty morning meals. Rabbits aren't as common as they were back then, so rabbit pie has vanished from our tables and Easter traditions. You know what? All good things come to an end. Now, the French weren't fans of the rabbit pie, so they decided to whip up a pigeon pie instead. This delicacy dates all the way back to the 17th century when James Hart, a Scottish physician, wrote in 1633 that pigeon pies were usually served with far too much pepper. It became an instant hit after Hart's paper, and people started cutting down on the pepper a bit. This crispy dish was a savory game pie made of pigeon meat and various other ingredients traditional to French cuisine. The buttery crust made it a luxurious treat which was common on banquet tables. It was a tradition for wives to make pigeon pie after their husbands spent long days hunting for the delicious bird. But hey, tastes change, and so do our feathered friends. The Watergate cake popping up in the 70s was all about riding the wave of the famous scandal it's named after. This pistachio-flavored cake, made with pistachio pudding mix, sports a funky green color and a nutty taste, lightened up with some club soda. It's usually decked out with a frosting that's also got pudding in it and sprinkled with pecans, making for a pretty unique look and texture. The whole novelty of its theme and the connection to a wild moment in politics helped make it a hit. But as people started digging more natural and less artificially flavored sweets, its star faded. Watergate cake was typically a sheet cake, super easy to slice up for casual gatherings. The French also made a significant contribution to delicious casseroles with the easy shepherd's pie. It was a meaty casserole traditionally made with lamb meat. Shepherd's pie has its roots in British cuisine. The name shepherd's pie specifically refers to the use of lamb, while cottage pie is used when beef is the main ingredient. This one was an easy one to make as it didn't require hours of preparation. The dish became popular in the UK during the 19th century, particularly after the introduction of potatoes in the late 18th century. This one was used for meal prep, as it was great for making ahead and freezing. It was known as hachis parmentier in French cuisine, but different countries came up with their own version of the shepherd's pie. In Australia and New Zealand, it's often called cottage pie, and in some places the dish includes sweet potatoes or other unique toppings. Blueberry buckle is a delightful breakfast pastry that originated in the early 20th century. The term buckle originated in the 19th century to describe fruit-studded cakes that buckled under the weight of their toppings during baking. This dish, typically enjoyed as a breakfast or brunch item, combines a moist cake base with fresh blueberries and a crumbly streusel topping. The ingredients for blueberry buckle include flour, sugar, butter, eggs, and fresh blueberries, creating a sweet and satisfying treat. Blueberry buckle became popular when it was embraced as a traditional breakfast pastry in the northeastern United States, where blueberries are plentiful. In Maine, blueberry buckle is celebrated with an annual festival featuring baking competitions, tastings, and live music, highlighting the state's rich blueberry heritage. Jellied eels were a staple on the dinner table back in the 1900s. This dish was whipped up in London in the 18th century, when a bored chef decided to mix things up a bit. Here's the thing. Eels were dirt cheap back in the day, so they were everyone's favorite source of meat. The dish consisted of chopped eels boiled in a spiced stock and allowed to cool and set, forming a jelly. It was usually served cold and made a good substitute for dessert. Since it was light on the pockets, the English loved to serve it at dinner parties and festivals. It also made its way out to other parts of Europe such as Denmark and Sweden, which came up with their own versions of the jelly. Butterscotch brownies, or blondies, mix it up with brown sugar, butter, flour, eggs, and baking powder, all jazzed up with butterscotch chips. These goodies swapped out chocolate for a sweet caramel-like vibe and caught on fast. They were super easy to whip up, making them a go-to for anyone needing a quick dessert fix without the intense richness of chocolate. Their ease of preparation and ability to store well made them popular for potlucks, school functions, and holiday treat exchanges. Over time, though, as bakers got more into gourmet and unique flavors, blondies weren't the main event anymore. Usually, you'd find them cut into squares, laid out on a platter, perfect for grabbing a bite without any fuss. The combo of a chewy middle with a bit of crunch around the edges really made these stand out. Eggplant Parmesan casserole is another Italian classic that became a favorite in the United States. Eggplant was often a challenge to serve to picky eaters, so Grandma got creative and found a way to sneak it into delicious dishes, which resulted in the creation of this hearty dish. In Italy, it's better known as Parmigiana and is a popular gourmet dish. The casserole is a more laid-back version of the delicacy, as you can enjoy the flavors of this classic Italian dish without all the work of frying each individual slice of eggplant. Don't get me wrong, Gram loved making us those labor-intensive meals, but even she deserved a break sometimes. And this casserole gave her the perfect opportunity to whip up something delicious without spending hours in the kitchen. Rice Krispies Treats for Breakfast is a playful and inventive dish that originated in the mid-20th century. In 1940, Kellogg's introduced Rice Krispies cereal, and soon after, recipes for Rice Krispies treats began appearing on the cereal box, contributing to their widespread popularity. This fun treat consists of Rice Krispies cereal mixed with melted marshmallows and butter, shaped into bars. Rice Krispies give it a light and crispy texture, while toppings like chocolate chips, peanut butter, or colorful sprinkles make it festive. The treats gained popularity when families began enjoying them as a playful snack, beloved by both children and adults. Their airy texture and gooey sweetness set them apart from other cereal-based treats. Rice Krispies treats showcase the potential for creative and indulgent snacks, reflecting the joy of childhood and the endless possibilities of breakfast. If you think the beef heart is off limits for cuisine, you're wrong, because stuffed hearts were once a celebrated dish. This dish sounds like something out of a horror movie, but it was actually quite common. Think of the beef heart cleaned, stuffed with a mixture of breadcrumbs, herbs, and often pine nuts or raisins, and then roasted or braised. Sounds appetizing yet? This economical and tasty meal was a testament to the nose-to-tail philosophy of cooking, where no part of the animal was wasted. In Europe, the practice of stuffing animal hearts dates back to medieval times. It was a popular dish amongst the working class in England, while it was reserved for the elite in France. Eating hearts isn't as common today, but if you ever tried this one, you'd understand the hype. Down in Greensboro, North Carolina, Mrs. L.H. Wiggins came up with the Hummingbird cake, which Southern Living magazine made famous in '78. This cake's got it all: bananas, pineapple, pecans, cinnamon, and it's topped with a killer cream cheese frosting that ties all those spicy and fruity flavors together. It became a big deal fast, thanks to its unique taste combo and the fact that it was pretty easy to make for any kind of get-together. Over time, though, as dessert trends evolved and global flavors took the spotlight, the Hummingbird cake kind of drifted out of the mainstream. The cake is particularly beloved in the South, where it remains a celebrated part of regional culinary traditions. Typically, this cake was stacked up high in layers and generously slathered with frosting, making it a showstopper at parties. The turkey noodle casserole wasn't the only way of using up leftover turkey from the fridge. Turkey tetrazzini was another delicious dish you could make the morning after Thanksgiving. This casserole typically started out with a base of spaghetti, along with a creamy sauce that's usually made from a combination of broth, cream, and sometimes cream of mushroom soup and vegetables like peas, carrots, or celery. It was named after the Italian opera singer Luisa Tetrazzini, who was known for her performances in the early 20th century. The dish is believed to have been created in the early 20th century, coinciding with Tetrazzini's rise to fame. Many recipes included cheese, such as Parmesan or cheddar, which made it kid-friendly. This was another great example of how Graham could make something so delicious out of leftovers that might have otherwise gone to waste. Breakfast in a can is a quirky and convenient dish that emerged in the early 20th century. This all-in-one meal includes ingredients like beans, sausage, eggs, or pancakes, all packed into a can for easy prep. The convenience and versatility of this dish have made it a favorite among campers, hikers, and outdoor enthusiasts. During World War II, breakfast in a can became popular among soldiers as a portable and shelf-stable option for breakfast in the field. The type of meat commonly used in breakfast in a can varies, but it often includes sausage or bacon, providing a savory and filling meal. Breakfast in a can showcases the potential for ready-to-eat meals. Despite its humble origins, breakfast in a can continues to be enjoyed today as a convenient and satisfying breakfast option for people on the go. Ever wondered what the ultimate American comfort food was back in the day? Well, the only right answer is the veal and ham pie. This hearty pie combined the delicate flavors of veal with the salty goodness of ham. The pie's popularity surged during the Victorian era. It originated in the kitchens of English settlers and was a practical choice for using up leftovers, but soon became a meal for the elite. While it was a luxurious delicacy in England, it was a staple in large households in America. Not only was it easy to whip up, but was also cheap to make, which made it perfect for communal gatherings and large families. If you want to give your grandparents a rush of nostalgia, ask them about this meaty goodness, and who knows, your grandma might even dust off some cookbooks. Divinity is this super fluffy cloud-like candy that popped up in the US early in the 20th century. It's mostly whipped up from egg whites, sugar, and corn syrup, and often you'll find nuts like pecans or walnuts thrown in for a nice crunch. Making Divinity can be tricky because humidity can totally mess with it. But when you get it right, it's like eating a sweet, airy piece of heaven. It got super popular around the holidays because it's a blast to make with family and tastes like a festive treat. Over time, though, as quicker, easier sweets came around, not as many folks made it from scratch. It's usually scooped onto wax paper to set into little clouds, sometimes topped with a nut. Green bean casserole started out as a traditional Thanksgiving meal, but because of how much everyone loved it, it soon became a year-round delicacy. This one was also created as a creative way to market Campbell's cream of mushroom soup. When canned soups first hit the food aisle at grocery stores, many people were skeptical about them. Introducing new recipes was a way of encouraging people to add them to their daily meals, and Grandma really followed through with this one. The original recipe, known as the green bean bake, was developed by Dorcas Riley, a home economist at Campbell's. It combined green beans, cream of mushroom soup, and fried onions, and it was published in the company's recipe booklet. Our sweet old grandmas decided to make this one better by adding their own twists to the original recipe. Although traditionally rich and creamy, there were lighter versions of green bean casserole that used lower fat ingredients or alternative toppings to make it healthier. The bologna and egg breakfast sandwich is a straightforward and satisfying dish that has been enjoyed since the mid-20th century. This dish combines fried bologna, a cooked egg, and cheese on a soft roll or bread. Fried bologna sandwiches have been a staple in working-class American households since the early 20th century, providing a hearty and affordable meal option. The bologna is typically prepared by frying it until it develops a crispy edge, while the egg is cooked to preference, often sunny side up or over easy. The sandwich is usually served on a soft roll or white bread, complementing the savory fillings. In 2019, a food truck in Nashville, Tennessee, gained attention for serving gourmet versions of the classic bologna and egg sandwich, elevating it to a trendy brunch item. Neapolitan ice cream sandwiches throw together classic flavors: vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry ice cream, squeezed between cookies or wafers. This treat took the old-school Neapolitan ice cream idea from Italy, where mixing up flavors was the thing, and turned it into a fun, easy-to-eat dessert. Having all those flavors in one bite made it super popular at family get-togethers and community events. It was a blast of color and taste that just felt like a party. But as the dessert scene got crowded with new, exotic flavors and gourmet options, these ice cream sandwiches didn't stand out as much. They were simple but effective, with clear layers of ice cream showing through the cookies, making every bite a mix of creamy and crunchy. Speaking of veggie casseroles, the cabbage roll casserole was another hit on the dinner table. Don't we all love some good old-fashioned cabbage rolls? Well, this recipe took the labor-intensive meal and turned it into something simpler while retaining all the delicious flavors. Now this casserole has its origins in Eastern European cuisine, where cabbage rolls are a staple. It was a combination of recipes found in countries like Poland, Russia, and Hungary. Cabbage casserole not only tasted delicious, but also provided many health benefits with every bite. Cabbage is a nutritious vegetable that's rich in vitamins C and K, fiber, and antioxidants. Delicious and healthy. What's more to ask? French toast with powdered sugar, also known as pain perdu in France, is a beloved breakfast dish dating back to the 4th or 5th century. It involves dipping bread in a mixture of eggs and milk, then frying it until golden brown. Traditionally, it's served with powdered sugar, though various toppings like fruit or syrup can be added. The bread choice impacts the dish, with brioche or challah being popular for their rich texture and flavor. The name pain perdu means lost bread, as it originally used stale bread to prevent waste. Unique toppings such as cream or savory ingredients have added variety to this classic. In the U.S., Julia Child popularized French toast, cementing its place in American cuisine and making it a household staple. Her televised cooking show, The French Chef, played a significant role in introducing French toast to a wider American audience. But with the rise of Chinese hot pots, instant boiled mutton might just make a comeback. Corned beef and cabbage. A classic St. Patrick's Day dish, but did you know it was once a common comfort food? Known as salt beef in some Commonwealth countries, this American-Irish dish was a hearty protein source, and a staple on the table during the 17th through the early 20th centuries. It was tinned along with sugar and spices during World War I and World War II when fresh meat was rationed. Cabbage brought in the right amount of nutrients, making this meal not just delicious, but also a healthy choice. While still popular in some circles, corned beef and cabbage aren't half as famous as it once was. But if you're ever up for some good old-fashioned... Now, doesn't a 1900s culinary comeback sound tasty? Let me know which dish stood out to you the most in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.